here's how to maintain your gains while injured. Before we get started, comment your worst injury down below. With that being said, let's get into the video. First off, you have to determine what exactly is injured and what is the severity of the injury. Is it a tweak? Is it a strain? Is it a broken bone? Did you just get surgery? All of these are things to consider. Now, depending on that severity, you could determine whether or not you need a doctor, just a couple of weeks of rest, or maybe even a deload altogether. This is really just a huge spectrum. It depends on your situation. With that said, unless you're competing at a super high level, stop trying to push through injuries and act like they don't even exist. And this personally has taken me years to figure out because I always just wanted to tough it out or just man up. But the reality is it was just idiotic of me to ignore the problem altogether. So please don't make the same mistakes I did. I made the mistakes for you, so no need to go experience it for yourself. Now, something related to that is coming back too early. Make sure you're 100% before you start to go at your max level again, or just come back fully altogether. Because if you're at 85% and you're not quite that 100% and you come back into training, you'll realize very quickly that that 85 drops to 75, drops to 55, and all of a sudden you're at a 30% where you can't even train properly altogether. Keep in mind that muscle memory is a thing, so even though you might feel a little weird not lifting for a bit, or you might start to see a loss in your gains, it'll come back. When you start back up again, you'll get your muscle back rather quickly, depending on how long you've taken a break and what your training age is, meaning how long you've been training for. So with all that foundational stuff out of the way, we could get into what you can do. So one thing you can do is work out whatever isn't hurt or injured, meaning if your ankle or knee is hurting, then work out your upper body. If your shoulder or elbow is hurting, work out your lower body. And that being said, if only one side of the body is hurting, it's okay to work out that other side. More on that later. That being said, there are other methods you could use to stay fit as well. So instead of walking or running, which might be your preferred choice of cardio, you could do cycling. And I don't mean the ones that involve needles, I mean using a bicycle. And maybe using something with a high buoyancy, like swimming, would take a lot of pressure off the joints as well. You could also do bodyweight stuff, or just lower the weights all around and just do higher reps. Feel more of a burn. Keep in mind when you are injured, you are unlikely to build a huge amount of muscle depending on the type and severity of the injury. So you are more so trying to maintain what you have. It's much easier to maintain your muscle than it is to build muscle. So doing any of these things is much better than doing nothing at all. If you are enjoying the video so far, or if you feel like you've learned something new, please be sure to drop a like down below. I'll give you a personal experience right now of what I am dealing with injury-wise. I have a low back injury and a hip injury going on at the moment. They're very minor injuries, nothing serious as far as I can tell. So this is what I've been doing and what's best worked for me so far. So for a week and a half, I avoided lower body altogether just because I was doing a whole lot of squatting, more so heavier movements, a lot of hinge movements at the hip like RDLs. And I've really taken off anything that puts pressure on my low back, something such as deadlifts especially. Of course, I've been able to hit my shoulders and arms, no problem whatsoever. And I could also hit my chest and back as well. However, since my low back is messing with me, I decided to do all my back stuff either very controlled or lighter, or something that is supporting my chest. So any rowing motions I'm doing, they're all chest supported, so I'm not leaning back into the low back and risking any further damage or injury. Just about all of my ab work involves something with the low back or my hips, so I have cut that out altogether, and I was just simply walking on the treadmill after working out in order to lose a little bit of extra fat instead of working the ab muscle. And then just recently, about a week and a half after I stopped hitting legs, I have just been doing very strict movements in forms of the leg extension machine and leg curl machine, and then also seated calf raises. So this way, not standing calf raises where my spine is loaded up and there's a pressure on my shoulders, but seated. And that being said, with the leg extension and leg curls, I make sure I'm pretty locked into the seat, like my butt isn't coming up, I'm not away from the seat, I'm locked in as tight as possible. And I even drop the weight a little bit so that when I'm grabbing the handles beneath, I don't have to struggle as much and my body doesn't come up as much. So dropping the weight and just doing higher reps with most things, lower body. As far as calories and diet goes, I believe that either maintaining or being in a slight surplus, depending on what your goal was previously, would help the most. But keep in mind, if you are eating in a 600 calorie surplus and you're not lifting, you're not working out, then you're far more likely to just gain fat off of that. That being said, any sort of deficit you're in is just going to catalyze that muscle atrophy much faster. These are just some things to keep in mind. With that diet, you want to be consuming a good amount of protein as well. 1 gram per pound of body weight usually works pretty well for most active people. And protein is huge for building and maintaining muscle, so consuming adequate amounts would help a lot. So some ways to consume some protein are through certain foods such as meat or whey protein powders. You remember earlier in the video when I mentioned how if one side of your body is hurting, then just work the other side? Well, this is because there is something called the contralateral training effect. I know, some big boy words. But essentially what this means is that when you are training one side of the body, the other side of the body is also getting that neurological adaptation to it, meaning you are increasing strength in the other side as well. Now this is pretty hard to comprehend and understand, but it has been shown to work, and I would highly recommend doing it, especially if one side of you is impaired. And above anything else, please take your recovery seriously. Accept the injury, learn how to recover from said injury, and get lots of sleep. And that being said, once you have recovered from your injury, ease back into it. There is no rush, especially if you are not a competitive athlete. So in my case, when I get back into squatting, I'm not going to step under 355 or even 315 for that matter for at least a few sessions until I feel fully prepared and have made my way back into things. Because if I let my ego take over and I did rush back into it, I'd probably just get injured again and maybe even get more injured than I was previously. So what's the point of rushing back into it? And that being said, if you are doing a sport, hopefully you at least have a coach that can guide you and ease you back in the proper way that they know how to, so that way you can still compete at your highest level. But for all my peeps that aren't competing, I would highly recommend taking this advice. All in all, what I'm trying to say is train smarter, not harder. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Here is the video YouTube thinks you'll like next, so be sure to check it out right here.